Do you have an effective means of judging the training that you are designing for yourself or for your soldiers? Do you know simple ways of maximizing the amount of skills development out of the training scenarios that you participate in? Stay tuned, for that's what we'll be discussing on today's episode of the Evolving Warfighter. Welcome back to the Evolving Warfighter. My name is Dr. Franklin Annis. As I continue to explore practical self-development techniques, it has occurred to me that I must present to you a simple but yet effective way of judging training scenarios. In future episodes, I hope to get into the utilization of board games, logic problems, and even video games as a means of self-development. But in order to discuss those topics, we must have some type of standard approach or concept of how to judge these type of training scenarios and what is the likely skill development that we can get out of each of these type of activities. For many years, the medical field has been using high-quality simulations to train medical providers on safe techniques to treat patients. Given the high risk of damaging a human being, it is important to create an environment to which very high and very realistic and very significant amount of skills development occurs for those interested in entering the medical field. For this reason, we can use a model that was developed by the medical field as a means to help us judge self-development techniques in military training scenarios. The assessment method is rather simple. It depends on two factors. The first factor is the fidelity of the simulator. How lifelike or realistic is the simulation? And we can rate this on a scale between low and high. The second factor we're going to look at is the amount of skill development that is likely to come out of this activity. Again, we can rate this in terms of going from low to high. As I graph this out to you, it'll become apparent that the more realistic the training scenario becomes, the more likely we are to gain significant amount of skills development if we engage into those activities. Now that we have an understanding of this theory, we'll add a couple more data sets to further explore this model. The yellow line that appears on this graph actually represents the skill acquisition of an intermediate level learner as the fidelity of the simulation increases. Now we're going to add the data sets for a novice level learner. As you can see here, it does not require much fidelity of the simulation for the novice level learner to gain a fair amount of skills development from this training scenario. This may be due to the fact that the novice level learner is new to the task and needs some time to develop the skills required to complete all the subtasks within the larger scenario. On the contrary, an expert level learner, shown here, requires much fidelity to gain skill development. This is because these individuals may have vast knowledge in all the related subtasks and need new challenges to further develop their skills. This model may demonstrate that the Army crawl, walk, run approach to training is an effective method of training because it maintains the skill acquisition at a moderate level throughout the training. Now that we have a good understanding of this model, we're going to make some slight changes to make it a better tool for assessing military training. The first thing we're going to do is we're only going to use the intermediate data points for this chart. Since we're using it as a theoretical model, the important thing to remember is as the fidelity of the simulation increases, so does the skill acquisition. The second thing we're going to do is we're going to assess the fidelity of simulations based on a scale that ranges from 0 to 99%. Now you may ask, why am I not including 100% on this matrix? And the answer lies within the Army Leadership Development Model. I would assert to get to 100% fidelity in simulation, you would not be training, but actually doing the task. If we were to look at the Army Leadership Development Model, this would place us squarely within the operational domain. Therefore, we are not including 100% on this matrix. The scale between 0 and 99%, however, could fall within either the self-development domain or the domain of institutional training. The final thing that we're going to do to this chart is we're going to add a danger zone. The United States military is tasked with the dangerous mission of protecting the United States. If we make our training scenarios too close to actual combat situations, we run the risk of physically or psychologically injuring our soldiers before they ever set foot on a battlefield. In collective training, it is up to the commander to make wise decisions to mitigate risks both to the physical and psychological health of their soldiers. It is also our responsibility at an individual level to be wise about what we're doing in terms of self-development, to also ensure that we have appropriate risk mitigation in place to guard our physical and psychological health. This danger zone is not fixed at a set point on this graph. It should be modified based on the risks of the training at hand and the needs of the collective unit or individual soldiers. Now, while I've presented you a good matrix on how to assess training scenarios, please remember that the emphasis should not always be on high-fidelity training simulations. While the goal should always be to acquire new information and new skills as we go through training, high-fidelity training scenarios often come with significant costs. Please consider the cost of training scenarios while you select different techniques to train yourself and your soldiers. When presented with the option of conducting no training and conducting low-fidelity training, we must always choose to conduct training, because even in low-fidelity training, we are still likely to acquire some new skill development. So please encourage your soldiers and yourself whenever possible to engage in training, even if it is just hip pocket training. Now that we've presented you with this assessment matrix, we will run through one example of how to use this matrix to evaluate a training scenario and how to make slight modifications to the environment to maximize skill development. The example we'll use is engaging individual targets with an M16 series rifle. In all three of the following examples, we're going to assume that the soldiers or service members are engaging human-shaped targets. This is critical to develop realism to the modern battlefield. If you would like more information on the impact of switching from a bullseye target to a human-shaped target on the use of weapon systems on a battlefield, I suggest you read the book On Killing by Dr. Grossman. The picture displayed on screen is the first example I have for you. Here you can see airmen training with a Engagement Skills Trainer, or EST 2000. As you can see from this picture, it is a video game-like system and it's operated inside a controlled environment. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to assess the danger zone or risk of this training scenario. Since this is not utilizing real weapon systems, we're going to rate the danger zone very small for this example. The only danger that this might present is the training scenarios becoming too realistic. Okay, next we're going to do is we're going to evaluate realism here. As you can see by the screen, the airmen are at least wearing helmets, but they are not wearing body armor. The airman on the far left you see is wearing a load-bearing equipment, but is not wearing the full body armor that may impact the length of pull of that rifle. So therefore there is some slight degrade on how that rifle system would actually be used in combat. The EST 2000 system does offer some distinct advantage in terms of reproducing a realistic training environment. It includes the sights, sounds, and feels of a combat zone. The weapon systems themselves are weighted to be roughly that of a normal weapon system. They do have piston-driven devices inside them to give a recoil. The screen is programmed like a giant video game. It's a very significant size that gives some lifelike feedback for being inside the situation. The acoustic systems or sound systems attached to these training programs do a very effective job in reproducing the sounds of combat. The EST 2000 system does create some significant advances in the fidelity of simulations versus a standard military rifle range. There can be programmed with lifelike targets, can have scenarios where you have enemy soldiers running around the battlefield, in addition to the standard appearance of military pop-up targets. Some disadvantage to the system: obviously it does not offer the smell of a modern battlefield. And finally, the environment that these individuals are practicing their engagement skills is not lifelike, in the sense that it is an air-conditioned building. It's very controlled. They're laying on nice rubber mats. They're very comfortable while training, which does offer some advantages in getting them to a a base level skill set or a walk level experience, it does not help in terms of engaging higher level training skills to maximize that simulation fidelity. The second example I have for you is this ROTC cadets firing on a MRF range. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to assess the danger level for this training environment. They are using actual weapon systems. Additionally, with a new ROTC cadet or an initial entry soldier, they are not well experienced with handling these weapons, which would require increased monitoring to make sure that we have a safe environment. So we're going to have a significantly large danger zone as we evaluate this training. As we look on the screen, we see this individual is actually firing the M16 rifle system. So she has all the sights, sounds, feels, and smells of firing a rifle. However, we look at some drawbacks here. We take a look and we realize she is not wearing any type of armor at all. There's no helmet, no body armor, no gloves. This could be significantly critical in the fact that body armor adds to the length of pull or the length of a rifle stock, which can shift things such as a sight picture. So while this is good to train initial entry soldiers on how to shoot in a comfortable setting without their body armor, once they demonstrate minimum level of proficiency without their body armor, we could add body armor onto the scenario to increase the fidelity and ensure that their training matches what they would do on a modern battlefield. Additionally, we're going to assume that if they're practicing on a MRF range, they have a very limited capability of the different scenarios they can go through. I'm assuming she's going through a normal table of fire, but if they wanted to do some type of training out of the usual, they only have a limited number of targets they can make pop up or pop down, which can limit the amount of training or types of training they can do in this scenario. Finally, I have a soldier here firing his rifle. Once again, he's using the actual weapon system, which gives him all the tactile stimulation, the sights, the sounds, and the smells of firing an actual weapon system. This soldier is wearing all his protective armor. If he was to engage in a winter environment, he's wearing the gear and equipment that he would be there. So he's maximizing the amount of fidelity for that training for the realistic environment. Once again, we're going to assume that these individuals are firing on a MRF range with a set number of pop-up targets, which can limit the flexibility in training that they can do on these type of ranges. So we'll assess the danger for this training scenario. We'll make the assumption that these are well-trained soldiers and they have experience working with the rifle system. So while it is dangerous that they're working with true live weapon systems, some of that has been mitigated through experience. We are, however, going to slightly increase the danger zone in this training scenario because of the hostile environment. As you can see, they're firing while laying on snow. So either we should limit the time duration that they're exposed to this environment or have quality checks in place to make sure that these individuals are not experiencing cold weather injuries as we train and prepare them for war. It would be difficult to declare one of these three examples as a winner in terms of being the best training environment, because every unit and every individual has a different training need. So I have to ask you, which of these three do you believe that your unit or yourself would be best in training in to maximize and build on the skills that you've already developed? I would encourage both leaders and individuals when designing collective or individual training to take a look at ways to simply or cost-effectively increase the fidelity of simulations. This would be doing things such as wearing the full body armor or full equipment on rifle ranges. This change alone does not cost much and can give soldiers more experiences on what they would actually encounter on the modern battlefield. While I understand through personal experience and working with soldiers that soldiers often do not understand why they have to wear this equipment while on the range. And it is our jobs as individuals and as leaders to explain that it is important to train with the most fidelity to combat as possible to ensure that we are the most prepared to dominate the modern battlefield. Thank you for watching this video. Please stay tuned for future episodes on the use of board games, logic problems, and even video games to increase military self-development. If you like this video, please remember to subscribe to the Evolving Warfighter. If you missed my video on how to get the most out of reading for military self-development, you can find the link right here.